Welcome to the American Revolution presentation. I am Mark Whitman Jr. and I'll be your presenter today. This is a 4th grade assignment for my history class and I hope you'll learn something helpful. The presentation objectives are to understand the timeline of events of the American Revolution, be familiarized with major battles of the Revolution, know key people who helped Americans gain independence from Great Britain. The events that led to the American Revolution all began with the French and Indian War. The French were not actually fighting the Indians. The war was named after the enemies of the British, who were the French, and the French's ally, the Indians. The war began as a competition for control of the Ohio River Valley. Around 1750, the French had moved to make their claims to the Ohio River Valley stronger. They sent soldiers into the region to drive out British traders. Then the Virginians built a fort at the forks of the Ohio River Valley. They barely finished the fort when suddenly the French attacked. When the French took over the fort, it was later named Fort Duquesne in honor of the Marquis de Duquesne, the newly appointed Governor General of New France. Meanwhile, unaware of the attack by the French, Governor Robert Dinwiddie of Virginia sent young George Washington with 150 men to the forks of Ohio River Valley to reinforce the Virginian fort in 1754. Thinking he might be attacked by considerable forces, Washington later built a makeshift fort called Fort Necessity. Later, a band of 600 French soldiers and 100 of their Indian allies attacked Fort Necessity, and the Virginians surrendered. But the French let Washington and his men go back to Virginia. By the mid-1700s, both Britain and France had formed alliances with many Native American tribes. The Iroquois had become one of Britain's most important Native American allies. In June and July of 1754, colonial leaders met at Albany, New York, in what was called the Albany Congress. 7 colonies sent representatives or delegates, including Benjamin Franklin from Pennsylvania. At the Albany Congress, Benjamin Franklin presented the Albany Plan of Union. The Albany Plan of Union was about uniting the colonies to fight against the French. To get support for his plan, Franklin posted the now famous Join or Die cartoon. The saying was about an old tale that said if you put a snake cut in pieces together at sunset, it will come back to life. However, in 1754, the colonies were not yet willing to unite and work together. Parliament, the lawmaking body of the British government in London, sent an army to the colonies with a commander named General Edward Braddock. He invited Washington along as an advisor. Braddock's first goal was to capture Fort Duquesne. Along the way, near where Washington built Fort Necessity, they were attacked by about 900 French and Indian soldiers. The British were trained to fight in open fields, but the French were hiding and shooting behind trees and boulders. When the battle ended, 2/3 of the armies were dead or wounded. Braddock was one of the dead. For the first 2 years of fighting, the French and Indian War had only been a North American conflict. In 1756, however, it became a world war, known as the 7 Years' War. To win the war, William Pitt, Britain's new leader of Parliament, decided to focus on North America and send troops and more supplies there. In 1758, the British captured many French forts. The French received needed help from the Spanish, who joined them. Because of superior sea power, however, Britain defeated Spanish forces in 1762. To make up for Spain's losses in the war, France gave most of Louisiana and part of what we call now Florida. The war finally ended in 1763 when the French and British signed the Treaty of Paris, leaving the British with the Ohio River Valley. After the war ended, colonists began to settle the lands between the Appalachians and the Mississippi. Chief Pontiac of the Ottawa tribe thought that the colonists were settling in North American hunting zones. In May 1763, Pontiac and his united tribes started attacking British forts. Pontiac and his forces attacked to get guns and supplies. However, as winter came, many Indians signed treaties with the British. Without supplies nor soldiers, Pontiac gave up the British forts. Many British leaders framed Pontiac's rebellion on the backcountry traders and settlers and believed that they did not have the right to claim or buy land in the region. To stop any more wars between the colonists and the British, King George III issued the Proclamation of 1763. It said that the colonists did not have the right to claim or buy North American land. The Indians were pleased, but the colonists were furious. They felt that the proclamation took away their rights as British citizens. They became even angrier when the king gave his colonial governors greater authority over the colonies. Nevertheless, the colonies continued to move westward. In 1764, British Parliament reviewed its costs from the French and Indian War and realized that they did not have enough money to pay for it. So they decided to pass new laws to make the colonists pay more taxes. The first law was known as the Sugar Act. The Sugar Act added taxes on sugar and other items coming from the colonies from other places. Coming into the colonies from other places. Colonists hated the act because they felt it violated their rights, so they spoke out against it. Later, less than a year after the Sugar Act became a law, Parliament passed a new law called the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act put higher taxes on anything made with paper, such as newspapers and legal documents. This act angered the colonists because they had no representation in the British Parliament. James Otis spoke to a crowd in Boston about the colonists' lack of representation in Parliament, and the crowd began to shout, "No taxation without representation!" More and more colonists started to boycott about British goods and attack the homes of the stamp tax collectors. They even beat some tax collectors too. In 1765, James Otis, Benjamin Franklin, and 25 other colonial leaders met in New York to talk about the Stamp Act. The meeting was called the Stamp Act Congress. With the act, Parliament seemed to be taking away their rights as British citizens. For example, as citizens, they had the right to be tried by a jury. But the act stated that the people who did not obey it could be tried in a special court without a jury. Later, to show the British authorities over the colonists, British sent more soldiers. Hatred between the British and the colonists broke out in fights. One of the worst was the Boston Massacre. The colonists started talking and throwing rocks and snowballs. At the British, or Redcoats as they were known. Then the Redcoats started firing their guns at the colonists. 3 colonists died immediately and 2 died later. Crispus Attucks, a former slave, was one of them. Many people consider Attucks to be the first person killed in the struggle for American liberty. In 1770, Parliament got rid of all the taxes except on tea. Then Parliament took over the East India Company, Britain's chief tea company. Meanwhile, in Pennsylvania and Massachusetts, colonists did not allow ships to come into port. On December 1773, colonists dressed as Mohawk Indians and poured 342 tea chests into the water. This was called the Boston Tea Party. To punish the colonists for their actions, Parliament passed the Intolerable Act. The Intolerable Act closed the port of Boston, took away the colonists' ability to elect colonial governors, and forced the colonists to let soldiers live in their houses. In 1774, the colonists discussed how to respond against the growing British threat during the First Continental Congress. Colonists decided to list their rights in a petition and send it to King George, but he did not accept it. In Massachusetts, the colonists started gathering Minutemen to defend Massachusetts. In April 1777, General Thomas Gage heard that 2 leaders of the Sons of Liberty were meeting in Lexington, and also that Minutemen were storing weapons. So he attacked it with 700 soldiers. A man named Paul Revere heard about the planned attack and got on his horse to warn the colonists. The Minutemen were ready for the British in Lexington and Concord. The fighting in both cities marked the beginning of a long, bitter war between the British and its 13 colonies. The poet Ralph Waldo Emerson would later call the shots fired at Lexington and Concord the shot heard around the world. Let's break here. During the intermission, a brief video clip will play by Schoolhouse Rock titled "The Shot Heard Around the World."